Are you deliberately trying to humiliate me?
At noon in Lagos, sunlight poured straight through the towering glass windows, turning the company lobby into a stage where there was no room for mistakes. On the cold marble floor, an elderly mother stepped in quietly worn-out sandals, a faded blouse, but in her hands, she held tightly a still warm lunchbox, as if it carried the last piece of love she could give. She had walked for more than 2 hours, just to bring this meal to her pregnant daughter-in-law. But the moment she stopped, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What are you doing here?" The daughter-in-law stepped forward, a fitted dress, a visible baby bump, a face so polished it felt cold. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only irritation and embarrassment. "Are you trying to humiliate me in front of the whole company?" The old mother hadn't even had the chance to speak. Hadn't he had the chance to explain? Hadn't he had the chance to say she was just afraid her daughter-in-law might be hungry? One push. Hard, direct, without hesitation. The lunchbox flew out of her hands. The lid burst open. Hot soup splashed across the polished marble floor. The old mother fell. The entire lobby fell silent. No one helped her up. No one said a word. Only eyes. Eyes watching as if it was completely normal. And in that very moment, a truth quietly began to change everything. Because in this life, the people you think are weak may be the ones holding your fate. And some actions take only a second, but the price lasts a lifetime. If you've made it this far, pause for a second. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment so this story can reach more people. And don't scroll away just yet, because what happens after that push will make everyone in that company never look at her the same way again. Hit subscribe now, because this story isn't just a shock. It's a lesson you will never forget. 2 seconds of silence passed. No one moved. No one spoke. As if the entire lobby had been frozen, every motion, every sound, every reaction suspended in an invisible space. Then, a laugh broke out. Soft, short, but sharp. It wasn't loud, not overwhelming, but enough to shatter the silence in the cruelest way. Then another, and someone else quietly followed. Those scattered sounds slowly connected, not into roaring laughter, but into a cold background of indifference. A man standing near the glass door tilted his head slightly, as if searching for a better angle. His phone lifted. The camera was already on. The reflected light in the lens pointed straight at the elderly woman sitting on the floor. Another woman covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked, but her eyes lit up with curiosity. Her finger tapped the screen. Record. No one said stop. No one said that's enough. Not a single person stepped forward. The lobby remained brightly lit. The lights reflected off the marble floor, highlighting every spill of soup, like a stain that didn't belong there. But the most frightening thing wasn't the fall. It was. No one saw it as something that needed to be stopped. The daughter-in-law stood there, arms crossed, chin slightly raised. Her high heels stopped right beside the steaming puddle of soup, thin vapor rising before fading into the cool air conditioning. "I told you never come here again." Her voice was calm, not loud, not harsh, but every word that fell carried unmistakable contempt. "You think I need this kind of peasant food?" She glanced down at the broken lunchbox. Her gaze didn't linger, as if it were nothing of value. "Look at you," she continued, lowering her voice. "You've dirtied this entire place." A few people smirked, not because they found it funny, but because they didn't want to be the only ones not laughing. That's how crowd pressure works. The mother remained on the floor. Slowly, she placed her hands on the ground, trying to keep her back straight, as if even in the lowest position she refused to let herself completely collapse. But her hands trembled slightly, not from pain, but from age, and perhaps from something deeper that had just been touched, something beyond the physical. She bent down, picking up the broken pieces of the lunchbox. Carefully, piece by piece, the lid cracked, a corner shattered, rice stuck to the cold marble floor. She gathered it with her hands, unhurried, unrushed, as if she were trying to hold on to not just the food, but the meaning of why she had come. Someone nearby lifted their foot slightly to keep their shoes from getting dirty. Another turned away, not out of compassion, but to avoid involvement. The spoon rolled away, stopping right at the tip of an employee's shoe. He looked down. His eyes wavered. All it would take was a small gesture, just one movement. But he didn't do it. He stood still, as if there were an invisible line between stepping in and keeping himself safe. The mother saw. She said nothing. Didn't he ask? She simply shifted herself forward. Her knee touched the floor. A very small sound, but enough for a few to hear. She reached out, slow, unsteady, and finally touched the spoon. She picked it up, looked at it for a second, then gently wiped it with the edge of her blouse. A simple action. But in this moment, it became unbearably heartbreaking, because, after everything that had just happened, she still behaved as if this meal was worth saving, as if her kindness had not been crushed. Then she looked up, her eyes steady, not directed at anyone in particular, not searching for help, not blaming, not begging, not resentful, just sadness, deep, still, heavy. A sadness that didn't explode, didn't make noise, but spread slowly like water seeping into stone. A wound had been recording suddenly lowered her phone. She didn't quite know why. She just didn't want to record anymore. A man cleared his throat softly, looked away. No one said it out loud, but something was changing. The daughter-in-law noticed. She frowned, not out of regret, but because she didn't like losing control. That elderly woman's gaze. Wasn't he weak? Wasn't he afraid? It was a silence that made her feel seen, exposed. She turned away. Her voice sharpened. Security. The uniformed man nearby flinched. Clean this up, and take her outside. He stepped forward, but slowly. His eyes met the mother's, then the crowd, then back to the daughter-in-law, as if weighing what was right and what would cost him. No one helped him decide. No one spoke. Meanwhile, the mother finally gathered what remained. A little rice, a bit of soup, the cleaned spoon. She held them all in her hands, as if holding on to something no one else valued anymore. The lobby remained silent, but not like before. The laughter had faded. Phones were slowly lowered. Eyes began to change, no longer completely indifferent, but mixed with something harder to name. And somewhere, an invisible wave was spreading, slow, but certain, as if this very moment was preparing for something greater, something that would make everyone who had just stood there watching unable to ever go back to who they were before. The mother placed the cleaned spoon on the most intact piece of the lunchbox lid. She looked down at the scattered food one last time, as if silently burying something that had died right there on the cold marble floor, not the meal, but the last trace of tenderness she had tried to bring. Then she pressed her hands against her knees and stood up, slowly, very slowly. At her age, every movement took time. Not because she was weak, but because her body had carried too many years, too many pains, too much endurance. And yet, in that slowness, there was something that made it impossible to look away. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. There was none of the posture of someone who had just been humiliated in front of a crowd. She stood straight, her shoulders still small beneath the worn blouse, silver hair still damp with drops of soup, her hands trembling slightly from the fall. But when she lifted her head, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath, not out of pity, but because something in her eyes had changed. The sadness was still there, but behind it was a terrifying stillness, not loud, not angry, not explosive, but the kind of silence that only appears when a person has crossed the final limit of what they can endure. She looked straight at her daughter-in-law, not down, not away, without blinking. The daughter-in-law remained where she stood, arms crossed, chin slightly raised as if holding on to the victory she believed she had. But quickly, she realized that gaze was no longer the same. It was no longer the look of someone seeking acceptance. It was the look of someone who had just stopped hoping. And sometimes, that is the most dangerous moment of all. The mother spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It was barely above a whisper. but every word landed clearly enough that no one in the lobby could pretend not to hear. You don't even know what you've just traded away. The sentence didn't sound like a threat. There was no fire, no sharp edge, no display of power, and yet it made the air grow heavy. A receptionist at the desk unconsciously held her breath. The security guard froze mid-step. A man who had been about to lower his phone tightened his grip again, as if instinct told him this moment was no longer just an ordinary scene of humiliation. The daughter-in-law blinked once, then her lips curved into a short smile, cold and sharp like glass. She let out a soft laugh. Not loud, but it echoed clearly in the suffocating silence. I just got rid of something that embarrasses me. She stepped forward half a step. Her heels struck the marble with a dry, chilling sound. Her eyes swept over the worn clothes, the silver hair, the frail hands still holding the broken lunchbox. Then she spoke slowly, emphasizing each word as if pushing a blade deeper. And you are that thing. The words fell, heavier than the push from earlier. This wasn't just an insult. It was an erasure of a person, a declaration that she had the right to decide who deserved to exist in her world, and who was nothing more than a stain to be wiped away. The entire lobby went silent. This time, no one laughed. No whispers, no discreet camera clicks, or awkward footsteps. The silence now was no longer indifference. It was fear, because everyone understood. There are words that, once spoken, can never be taken back. A young woman near the elevator turned slightly toward her colleague, lips parting as if to say something, then stopping. Her face had gone pale. Perhaps she didn't even understand why a chill had run down her spine. The security guard stood still, eyes forward, jaw clenched. He had seen arguments before, conflicts between power and vulnerability. But what had just been said went beyond anything he had ever heard. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit quietly slipped his phone into his pocket. He stopped recording, not because he suddenly became kind, but because instinct told him, from this moment on, anyone who treated this as entertainment might be the next to be shamed. The mother remained standing. She didn't blink. She didn't react the way people expected. She didn't cry. Didn't shout. Didn't ask, "Why are you treating me like this?" Didn't explain how far she had walked. Didn't mention the food was still warm. Didn't say she had woken up early, hands trembling as she chopped vegetables, reheated soup, wrapped each portion with the careful love of an aging mother who still believed that kindness, if sincere enough, could soften a heart. She said none of it. And that silence made everything heavier, because when the victim does not beg, the cruel lose the mirror they use to justify themselves. The daughter-in-law felt it. Her smile faded slightly, just slightly, but enough to reveal irritation. She wanted the older woman to break, to cry, to lose composure, to react like someone truly weak, because if she did, it would be easy to continue her role, the winner, the one in control, the one who sets the rules. But no, the mother simply stood there, calm to the point of cruelty, as if she could see through the perfect makeup, through the carefully protected pregnancy, through all the polished layers the daughter-in-law used to build her worth, and into the emptiness beneath. You think, the mother continued, her voice still soft, that I am what makes you ashamed. She paused. Not long, but enough to make every heart in the lobby tighten. No, she said. What makes you ashamed is what just came out of your own mouth. The daughter-in-law's face stiffened. Her smile vanished. A few people in the crowd lowered their eyes, avoiding each other's gaze, because this was no longer a clash between a poor mother-in-law and a wealthy daughter-in-law. It had become an invisible judgment. No courtroom, no gavel, no lawyers. Just one truth spoken at the exact moment every mask began to crack. The daughter-in-law inhaled, as if preparing to strike back with something even harsher. But this time, her voice didn't come immediately, because a small, unsettling truth had slipped into her mind. The atmosphere in the lobby was no longer on her side. All eyes were still on her, but they were no longer supportive. They were waiting to see, after saying something so cruel, how much further she could go. The mother closed her fingers gently around what remained of the lunchbox, as if holding on to the last piece of her dignity. Then she spoke again, slowly, each word placed deliberately onto the marble floor, so no one could pretend they had heard. Some things you lose you can buy back with money. Her eyes never left her daughter-in-law. But there are things, once you throw them away with your own hands, you will never get them back in this lifetime. No one dared interrupt. No one dared breathe too loudly. That bright, luxurious, perfect lobby now felt thick, like the air before a storm. And for the first time since the push, it was the daughter-in-law who felt the ground beneath her was no longer steady. Just as the atmosphere in the lobby had grown so heavy that no one dared blink for too long, a very faint sound drifted in from beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass doors. Not loud, not rushed. Just the soft roll of tires across the front drive, quiet in a way that felt almost terrifying. A few people turned their heads without meaning to. Then everyone looked. A long black car glided to a stop in front of the company, like a slice of power arriving silently in broad daylight. Its body was polished enough to reflect the marble columns outside, the blazing Lego sky, and the faces inside the lobby that were slowly draining of color. It stopped, precisely. Not a second too soon. Not a beat too late. As if the car had not arrived by chance, but at the exact moment fate had decided it was time to unmask someone. The front door opened. A man in a suit stepped out. He was no longer young, but his posture was straight, his stride steady, and his presence carried the kind of discipline found only in people who had spent too long in places where power is decided by a nod more than by words. His dark tie was perfectly knotted. His black leather shoes gleamed. His expression was calm, as though he were used to managing crises without letting a single emotion show. But the moment he crossed through the glass entrance, his eyes swept across the lobby, and everything changed at once. He saw the broken lunchbox first, a cheap container, bent, cracked at one corner, lying awkwardly on the luxurious marble floor, like a piece of evidence no one had managed to hide. Then he saw the soup spilled across the ground, a pale yellow broth, already cooling, clinging to the veins of the expensive marble, and creating a scene so out of place it hurt to look at. And then he saw the mother. She was still standing straight, old blouse, silver hair dotted with dried streaks of soup, her hands still holding what remained of the lunchbox. Not a single complaint, not a single demanding gesture. But the silence around her was no longer the silence of weakness. It was the kind of silence that made everyone else feel smaller. The man stopped short, just for a beat, but it was enough for everyone in the lobby to realize. He knew exactly who she was, and that was no small thing. He immediately quickened his pace. Not the frantic rush of someone panicking, but the tightly controlled urgency of a man who understood that from this moment on, every passing second had become extremely expensive. Then, right there in the lobby that had moments ago been thick with contempt, he stopped in front of her and bowed, deeply, so deeply that it felt as if the entire room had just heard something invisible crack. "Madam Chairwoman, we sincerely apologize for keeping you waiting." The space froze. Not the kind of silence that had come before. This was true shock. The kind that made even the hum of the air conditioning above seem unbearably loud. In the right corner of the lobby, someone's phone slipped from their hand. It hit the floor. The sharp crack against the marble rang out, like the opening gunshot of a collapse no one had prepared for. The security guard stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if he wanted to say something, but his throat had locked shut. The receptionist who had been secretly recording just moments ago had gone pale. She looked at her coworker, but the other woman stood just as still, as if they had both realized at the same time what they had just witnessed, not merely an act of humiliation, but the moment a foolish crowd had turned itself into witnesses to the destruction of an arrogant woman. And the daughter-in-law, All the blood seemed to drain from her face in a single second. Her lips, which had been sharp as blades only moments earlier, parted without meaning to. No smile, no scorn, no trace of the polished confidence she had worn all afternoon. Only stunned emptiness. Madam Chairwoman. The phrase did not enter her ears the way language normally works. It struck her mind, bounced back, then dropped straight into her chest, like a block of ice. Because if the woman she had just shoved to the ground in front of the entire company was the chairwoman, then everything she had just done was no longer a personal humiliation. It was social suicide. A middle-aged man standing near a marble pillar quickly lowered his eyes. He had laughed earlier. Now he was no longer sure whether he should even breathe too loudly. A young woman secretly stopped her video recording. Her fingers trembled so badly she tapped the wrong button twice. Another person hid their phone behind their back, as if simply making the device disappear would erase the footage they had already taken. But truth follows a brutally cruel rule. It does not disappear just because people become afraid of it. The man in the suit kept his head lowered for one beat longer than usual before finally straightening. In his eyes, there was the faintest flash of anger so tightly restrained it felt cold. "The car is ready, ma'am," he said more quietly. "The executive board is waiting for you upstairs." The executive board. Those three words landed like a second hammer blow across the lobby, because by now, no one could lie to themselves anymore and pretend this was some misunderstanding. Not a wealthy acquaintance, not a minor investor, not a vaguely important guest, but the chairwoman, the woman at the very top of the tower of power this entire company looked up to every single day. The mother did not speak right away. She only tilted her head slightly, looking at the man before her, as if that apology was nothing unexpected. On the face that had lived through too many years, there was not a trace of triumph, no satisfaction, no cold revenge, only a very deep exhaustion. The kind that appears when a person has finally stopped waiting for others to become decent. Then she gave a small nod, just a slight nod, but it was enough to make a few people in the lobby nearly buckle at the knees, because they understood. Everything had just been confirmed. The daughter-in-law stepped back half a step on instinct, then another. Her heels struck the marble with a small sound that felt completely out of rhythm. She wanted to speak, wanted to force out something, a denial, an apology, some frantic explanation, to patch the tear that had just ripped through her life. But her lips trembled without making a sound. The words "Madam Chairwoman" were still ringing in her mind like a death bell. And even worse, were the eyes now fixed on her. They had turned. Completely. No one was looking at the mother like some out-of-place old village woman in a luxurious building anymore. Now, everyone was looking at the daughter-in-law, as if she were a living mistake, as if she were someone who had just erased her own future with the very hand that pushed that woman to the floor. The mother let her gaze sweep across the lobby one final time, not for long, but long enough for each person to feel as though they had just been seen through completely. Phones lowered even farther. Eyes dropped away. Shoulders stiffened. The extravagant lobby that had been a stage for mockery just minutes ago now felt like a courtroom where the sentence had already been delivered without anyone ever raising their voice. Then her eyes passed over the daughter-in-law. Passed over. Did not stop. Did not linger. Did not accuse. She did not ask, "Do you still think I'm embarrassing now?" She did not ask, "Do you still want me gone?" She did not give her the privilege of a conversation. And that was the first punishment. The mother stepped forward. One slow, steady. The man in the suit immediately moved aside to clear the way. The entire lobby parted as well, like water splitting before the bow of a ship. No one said a word. No one dared block her. She walked past her daughter-in-law, close enough that the younger woman could smell the soups, still clinging to her blouse, the smell of homemade food, of a kitchen fire, of care and effort that she had just thrown to the floor like trash. But the mother did not look at her, did not stop, did not turn back. as if she had never existed, and that indifference nearly made the daughter-in-law collapse right there. Because sometimes, what destroys a person is not shouting, not a slap, not violent revenge, but the moment they realize that they are no longer important enough for someone to even be angry at them. Behind her, no one dared breathe too loudly. In front of her, the path opened straight ahead. Her worn sandals brushed across the marble floor, making the smallest sound in the entire lobby. But now, it echoed louder than all the laughter from earlier, louder than the phone hitting the floor, louder than the frantic heartbeat of the daughter-in-law standing frozen behind her. And as the black car door opened wider to receive her, everyone in the lobby understood something no one dared say out loud. This afternoon was not over. It had only just begun, and the price of a single shove would likely be far greater than anything the daughter-in-law had yet been capable of imagining. 30 minutes later, the entire building seemed to have become a different place. There were no more confident heels clicking across the marble floor. No more polished greetings drifting through the glass hallways. No more curious glances mixed with amusement like the ones in the lobby earlier. Everything had been stretched tight by an atmosphere so heavy that even the sound of the elevator doors opening felt like a warning. The emergency meeting room was on the top floor. Dark wooden doors, frosted glass. Inside stood a long conference table, reflecting the cold white lights above, with rows of leather chairs lined up so neatly it felt as if the room had been built for one purpose only: to make decisions that could change a person's life with a single sentence. Every executive was already there. No one arrived late. No one dared. The faces in the room were people accustomed to power, to multi-million-dollar figures, to contracts and merger strategies. Yet now they sat in an unusual silence. They exchanged few words. No small talk, no polite jokes. Only the occasional glance at one another before looking back toward the head of the table, where the central chair still remained empty. It was her seat, the woman who, just 30 minutes earlier, had been shoved to the floor in the lobby, like someone whose name did not matter. At the far end of the room, the daughter-in-law was brought in. No one had to restrain her. No one had to force her. But every step she took now felt as heavy as if she were dragging a block of stone behind her. Her pregnancy was still visible. Her dress was still expensive. Her makeup was still nearly flawless. And yet none of the things that had once allowed her to walk with her chin raised could save her now. She stood there in that cold, brightly lit room, surrounded by people who had once greeted her with easy smiles, and for the first time, felt truly small. There was no laughter now, no arrogant expressions, no crowd standing behind her to support her cruelty. There was only fear. It did not arrive loudly. It came slowly, cold, crawling up her spine, tightening around her throat, settling in her chest like an invisible hand squeezing every heartbeat. She looked around. No one smiled at her. No one signaled reassurance. No one treated her like the center of some small company stage anymore. Now, she was simply the subject of a judgment she herself had created. The door at the head of the room opened. Everyone rose immediately. The mother walked in. The lunchbox was no longer in her hands. There were no more traces of soup in her silver hair. Perhaps someone had taken her to a private room, given her a clean towel, a glass of warm water, a moment of silence before she stepped in here. But what made the entire room hold its breath was not that tidiness. It was her presence. She did not need jewelry, did not need an expensive dress, did not need high heels. She entered carrying only the calm that had been forged through decades of building, losing, enduring, and winning. The founder, the chairwoman, the woman who had built this company back when there were no shining glass walls, no metal logos, no young people walking in and imagining the world had begun with them. She sat in the center chair, slowly, lightly, but in that moment, the power in the room was completely redefined. The CO seated to her right gave a slight nod to the technical team. The lights dimmed a level. The large screen at the end of the room came to life. No one spoke. No introduction was needed. No opening remarks. The video began to play. The image of the lobby appeared with cruel clarity. A wide shot from the security camera. Unbiased. Uncut. No music. No effects. Only the truth. The mother appeared on the left side of the frame. She walked in with the lunchbox in her hands, her steps slow but careful, as if afraid to spill what she had carried for 2 hours. She stopped, looked around. There was a slight uncertainty in the way of someone unfamiliar with luxury buildings, yet still trying to hold on to her dignity. Then the daughter-in-law appeared. Fast, sharp, her pregnancy clearly visible beneath the fitted dress. Her arm lifted, her lips moved. Though the video had no sound, everyone in the room could hear the words in their mind, as clearly as if they had been spoken a second ago. "What are you doing here?" The footage continued. She moved closer. The mother had not even had time to explain. Then the shove came, decisive, hard, not remotely an accidental bump. There was no ambiguity to excuse it, no hidden angle from which to claim it had been misunderstood. It was simply a clear act of contempt. The lunchbox flew from her hands. The lid burst open. Soup spilled across the floor. The mother fell. Inside the meeting room, no one moved. No one looked at each other. They stared straight at the screen like people being forced to witness something that could no longer be denied. The video continued. The people in the lobby did not step forward to help. A few raised their phones. One person laughed. Another looked away. The daughter-in-law stood there with her arms crossed. From the high camera angle, that posture revealed even more clearly the cold cruelty that, downstairs in the lobby, the people siding with her had mistaken for power. On the screen, the mother bent down to pick up the broken pieces of the lunchbox. Slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but she did not beg anyone, did not grovel, did not cry out. There was only a sadness so heavy that even a silent image could carry it into this freezing room. Then the video stopped at the exact moment the man in the suit bowed before her. The frame froze. On the screen, the mother stood upright, while the daughter-in-law was turned halfway aside, as if all the arrogance inside her had been frozen a split second before shattering. The lights came back up. The air seemed to break into pieces. No one breathed loudly. No one coughed. No one dared set a hand down too hard on the table. The daughter-in-law stood there, eyes fixed on the dark screen. Her face so pale it was as if all the blood had drained from her body. There are moments when a person is not only afraid of punishment, but afraid of themselves, afraid of the image of who they are, when they are forced to look back without any makeup, excuses, or polished lies left to shield them. The CEO laced his fingers together and set them on the table. He did not shout, did not slam the table, did not need to raise his voice. Because in rooms like this, real power has never needed to be loud. He spoke slowly, each word separated clearly, like hammer blows falling onto stone. "You shoved the founder of this company." The daughter-in-law blinked softly, as if, even knowing the truth, part of her still hoped something in that sentence might change at the last second. But it didn't. The woman who built all of this before you ever walked in here. His eyes never left her. Not angry, just cold, cold like a steel door closing shut. "And your husband's mother." 3 sentences, 3 cuts, not a single extra word needed. Inside her mind, every image seemed to crash into the next. In chaos, the gleaming lobby, the warm lunchbox, the shove, the laughter, the crowd's sighs, the words "Madam Chairwoman," and now the screen replaying the entire truth from the emotionless perspective of a camera. There was no room left for denial, no opening left for excuses, no way to say she had been misunderstood, that her emotions had been unstable, that she was pregnant and not in control, that it had only been a momentary reaction. Because a camera does not believe emotions. A camera keeps only the truth. And the truth now stood before her like a courtroom made of glass. An older board member seated on the left quietly removed his glasses and wiped them slowly with a handkerchief. It was not a gesture of composure. It was the gesture of a man trying to remain calm when disappointment had gone beyond what etiquette could conceal. Another female executive, someone who had attended parties with the daughter-in-law more than once, turned her face away slightly, not out of pity, but out of shame for her self-shame that she had once mistaken arrogance for poise, coldness for class, and indifference for strength. And the mother, she remained seated at the head of the table, her hands resting calmly before her, back straight, face composed, not triumphant, not bitter, not savoring this moment. That was what made everything hurt more. Because if she had been angry, people could have told themselves the storm would eventually pass. But she was not angry. She was only looking, the look of someone who had given too many chances and finally stopped giving them. The daughter-in-law opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her throat was so dry that the first sound that came out was barely a word, "Mom." Just that one word. And even it broke apart with trembling. No one in the room rescued her. No one picked up the unfinished sentence for her. Because in moments like these, a person has no choice but to stand alone before what they have done. And for the first time, since walking into this company, she understood what it felt like to have no support left. The chair behind her was still there. The glass wall was still there. The pregnant belly she had once used like a soft shield to draw sympathy and leniency from others was still there. But none of it was enough anymore to protect her from the truth that had just been projected across the meeting room. A truth that had torn everything open, torn through the elegant surface, torn through the title of daughter-in-law, torn through the role of the perfect woman, torn through the illusion that status could make her immune to consequences. Outside the glass walls, Lagos was still bright with sun. Traffic was still moving. Phones were still ringing somewhere in other departments. Life outside had not stopped. But in this room, everything had changed forever. And everyone knew. Once the truth had been placed on the table like this, there would be no turning back. No one in the meeting room asked for more time. No one suggested postponing anything. No one reached for the familiar language people use when they want to delay consequences, just long enough to soften the truth. Because there are moments when the truth has been exposed so clearly that delay is no longer caution. It is cowardice. The CO closed the file folder. It was a very small sound. But in that room of absolute silence, it rang out like the slam of an iron door. He looked directly at the daughter-in-law. His voice was calm, in a way that felt almost chilling. The decision takes effect immediately. No one blinked. No one moved. Then one by one, each word was read out with the clarity of something being carved into stone. Terminated. Contract revoked. Permanent violation entered into record. Each decision fell like a final cut, decisive and irreversible. The daughter-in-law stood there, her hands slowly tightening at her sides. Her face was still drained of color, but now the panic was no longer showing only on the surface. It had sunk deeper, grown heavier, like someone realizing she had not merely lost a job. She had torn down the entire bridge, leading to her future with her own hands. No more company. No more elegant business cards. No more respectful greetings in the hallways. No more place in the world. She had walked into believing she was born to be admired. And the cruelest part was, no one in the room felt the decision was too harsh, because the video had already spoken for everyone. The mother remained seated at the head of the table. She did not interrupt, did not ask for mercy, did not demand something worse. She was simply silent, as if judgment was no longer a matter of emotion now, but of consequence. A legal secretary pushed the file forward. The stack of papers was thick, organized, emotionless. Inside were the dry lines of internal policy, clauses about professional ethics, abusive conduct, workplace violence, conflicts of interest, and proper conduct toward executive leadership. All of it had been written years earlier, perhaps at a time when no one could have imagined that one day those same rules would be used to end the career of the founder's own daughter-in-law. She looked down at the papers. Her lips trembled slightly. Perhaps she wanted to say something. That she was pregnant. That she had lost control. That she didn't know. That she had never meant to destroy everything this badly. But sometimes, language can no longer save anyone. Because in front of the truth, every late explanation sounds the same. Like someone knocking on a door that has already been locked from the inside. At that moment, the meeting room door opened. Her husband walked in. No one introduced him. No one needed to. His presence immediately made the already cold air feel even heavier. He was wearing a dark suit, his tie slightly crooked as if he had adjusted it in a hurry. Maybe he had just left another meeting. Maybe he had been called upstairs after hearing everything. Maybe on the way from another floor to this room, he had still been trying to tell himself there had to be some misunderstanding. But the moment he walked in and saw his mother at the head of the table, the last of the hope on his face disappeared. Then his eyes shifted to his wife, the woman whose hand he had once held at the altar, the woman carrying his child, the woman he had once believed would help him build a decent home. He looked at her for a long time, not angrily. He did not shout. He did not throw cruel words at her. He simply looked, and that look hurt more than any outburst could have. Because in his eyes now, there was no love left, no instinct to protect, no trace of the man who once would have stepped between her and the world. There was only disappointment. A disappointment so deep it nearly severed every bond between them. The daughter-in-law looked at him, as if clinging to the last chance left in that room. Please, her voice broke, dry and thin. But he gave a slight shake of his head. Not dramatic, not forceful, just a small movement, enough to extinguish every excuse before it could even take shape. Then he spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but every word was as clear as a sentence with no appeal. You did not disgrace me. The room did not move. He looked straight at her, without flinching, without softening. You disgraced yourself. The sentence was not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade of ice. Because if he had said, she had shamed the family, shamed the company, shamed him, there would still have been room for the excuse that she had only wronged others. But he did not say that. He said the most painful thing possible, that the first person she had destroyed was herself. The secretary pushed a pen toward him. He looked down at the document, just for a second. Then he picked it up. The sound of the pen touching paper was so faint, no one should have noticed it. But in that room, it echoed like the snapping of the last remaining thread. He signed, without hesitation, without asking anything further, without turning to anyone for sympathy. Then he set the pen down, placed the file back on the table, straight, firm, without a single unnecessary movement. The daughter-in-law watched his hand, as if she had just witnessed something even more painful than the termination itself. Because that document did not only end her role in the company, it was also proof that he had stopped standing on her side. He lifted his eyes one last time. His gaze passed briefly over her pregnant belly, only for an instant, so brief it could easily have been missed. In it, there was pain. There was pity for the child. There was also the exhaustion of a man who understood that from this moment on, his unborn child would enter a family already fractured by the arrogance of adults. But then that look passed too. It did not linger. It did not rescue. He turned away and walked out. Without hesitation, without looking back, the door opened, closed again, and everything ended in just a few calm footsteps. Sometimes that is the cruelest ending of all. Not an argument, not pleading, not curses, but a departure so final it says clearly, there is nothing left to save. The daughter-in-law remained standing there, in the cold room. The white lights overhead made her face look even paler, revealing every line of a person slowly coming undone. Her hands hung at her sides. Her shoulders were no longer straight. Her chin was no longer raised. All the elegance that had once served as armor had fallen away, leaving only a hollow, bewildered human being who had understood the price of one cruel moment far too late. She was still carrying a life inside her. A small, innocent life that knew nothing of honor, nothing of power, nothing of how quickly words can destroy a family. That made the scene even more painful. Because a woman, on the verge of becoming a mother, should have understood the value of tenderness more than anyone. She should have recognized that when an elderly mother carried a warm lunchbox through 2 hours of heat just to bring her food, love does not always arrive in beautiful packaging. Sometimes it arrives in a meal still warm, in trembling hands, in slow footsteps, in the quiet presence of an older woman whose only wish is that her child be safe and cared for. But she had not seen that, or worse, she had seen it and still looked down on it. And now, in front of her, there was no family left. Her husband had just walked out with every trace of love extinguished from his eyes. Her mother-in-law had not shouted, had not struck back, had not lowered herself into an argument, but her silence had closed the door to returning. There was no honor left. That video would never be erased from the memory of everyone who had been present that day. The way she shoved an elderly mother, the way she stood and watched, the way she used her words to reduce a person to the thing that embarrasses me, all of it had been witnessed, not as rumor, but as raw, cold, unedited truth. There was no way back, because some mistakes, once they cross a certain line, can no longer be called a slip of the tongue or a moment of lost control. They become character. The mother slowly rose from her seat at the head of the table. The whole room seemed to stop breathing with her. She did not look at her daughter-in-law for long. Just one quiet glance, with no bitterness, no triumph. But in that glance was something clearer than every decision that had just been read aloud. She had stopped hoping. And that is the most painful thing an elder can give the person who has wounded them. Not hatred, but the end of hope that they will ever change. She turned to the people in the room. Her voice was tired, but steady. This meeting is over. No one stood up too quickly. No one wanted to be the first to make a sound. The mother walked to the door, steadily, just as she had risen in the lobby. But this time, there was no lunchbox in her hands. The meal she had carried was gone. The love she had brought had been crushed into the marble floor. And some things, once spilled, can never be gathered back whole again. The door closed behind her. The daughter-in-law remained standing in the same place. No one came near her. No one comforted her. No one said everything would be okay, because everyone understood. Some stories do not end with loud crying. They end in a cold silence, where a person is forced to stand alone in the middle of everything they themselves destroyed. And from that moment on, she would have to live with a truth nothing could erase, that a single shove in a company lobby had been enough to make her lose her entire life. In life, some people appear so simple that we mistake them for small. But a person's worth has never been measured by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the way the crowd looks at them. It is measured by what they have built, what they have endured, and the kindness they still manage to keep after everything. Those who belittle others to make themselves feel taller will always learn, sooner or later, that the first thing to fall is not the victim's dignity, but their own character. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next parts, and leave a comment. If it were you, after that shove, would you forgive her? Where are you watching from?